What's going on, everybody? My name is Trendkill, and welcome back to Know Your Enemy. As always, if you haven't seen these videos before, in this series, we take a look at one specific god. We then talk about that god's abilities, and then we look at some tips that you can use as you're playing against that god in the game. Last week, we did Agni. In this video, we are doing another mage. Today, we're going to be talking about Janus, the god of portals. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is take a look at the graph of Janus. Now, it should be very obvious what he is good at. He's very high in damage, very high in mobility, very high in utility, and pretty weak in every other category. Now, he's about average on crowd control. That's because he's got a very good slow and he's got a banish. Now, his ability to control people is probably a little higher than what it shows here. However, a banish makes them immune to everything. So, while it does make them immobile for a second and a half, it's not nearly as good as, say, a stun from Emir. So there's not a lot of detective work to be done here. This graph is very one-sided and it's pretty obvious where his strengths are. So let's take a look at his abilities and figure out why his graph looks the way it does. Alright, so for starters, let's take a look at Janus's passive passages. This is very basic. Once he goes through a portal or steps over his threshold, his next ability is going to get an additional 25% scaling added to the damage. Meaning that if Janus has 200 magical power, he will deal 50 extra damage on his next attack. His first ability, Portal, is a portal that can be placed on a wall or on the ground. If it's placed on a wall, any player on Janus's team can enter either side of that portal, but once somebody does that, that portal disappears. If it's placed on the ground, any enemy that walks into it will be banished for 1.5 seconds as they fall through that portal, out a portal above it, and back down to the ground. In addition to that, Janus can also go through his own ground portals to banish himself to avoid damage. Now, one thing to know about this ability is that if Janus is crippled, he cannot go through a portal. Portals count as teleports, and crippled characters cannot teleport. Now, there's also damage linked to this ability, and that is when an enemy walks through the portal and falls from the sky, they take damage when they land. His second ability is Unstable Vortex. This is just a damaging ability. However, it's got a very interesting pattern to the way it flies. You'll notice there are two projectiles, and each projectile has a wave sort of pattern. The amount of damage that the ability shows in the tooltip is for one of those small projectiles. If you happen to get hit by both of those projectiles, you will take an additional 30% damage. Now, we've already talked about a lot of utility with his portal ability. Let's talk about even more utility with Threshold. As you level your Threshold, Janus gains a passive. He increases the movement speed of himself and any allies every time they go through a portal or walk over his threshold. So he's constantly giving himself and his allies bonus movement speed. Now, when you see Janus use Threshold, it's going to be a line on the ground. If an enemy happens to walk over that threshold, it will slow that enemy for 40% for 3 seconds. On top of that, even further, while those enemies are slowed, they take an additional 60% scaling off of Janus's next ability. Now, to take that even one step further, if Janus happens to cross a threshold and then enter a portal, he gets double that movement speed, so you can stack that threshold passive twice. This allows for a 60% movement speed increase for 5 seconds. Janus can bait someone forever. And if you are still crazy enough to think Janus is easy to catch, let's talk about his ultimate, Through Space and Time. This is an ultimate that is shot in a straight line that travels through the entire map. If he is in his base and you are in your base, he can shoot his ultimate all the way through the map and hit you. Now, obviously, that's probably super hard to do because he can't see you. He's just basically guessing where he's shooting. So doing that's not going to be that helpful. But in the first 500 meters or feet or whatever unit they use to measure distance in this game, for the first 500 units of distance, it also puts a portal on every surface that it passes through. Now, unlike his first portal where somebody goes through it once and the portal disappears, these portals last for 10 seconds. Anybody on your team can go through them at least one time per portal. This allows for some pretty interesting team placement. Now, to add even more flavor to this ability, if you happen to get hit by this ability after 800 units of distance, it will scale 200% more of your magical power and damage. And lastly, he is also immune to crowd control while casting. This is probably one of my favorite gods as far as flavor in the entire game. He just feels like his kit is exactly perfect for what this game needed and what this god is supposed to do. So let's go ahead and move into the mechanics section and let's learn a few things about how Janus is going to play when when you see him on the battlefield. Alright, so in the mechanics section, we're going to talk about things that you may see as you're playing against a Janus. Now, I think first and foremost, let's talk about Janus's versatility. We saw that his utility was literally off the charts. So let's take a look at why. So for the very first time, we're going to jump into a clip that was sent to me by another player. His name is Tyler1017, and this is a clip of him versus a Bakasura that I think very clearly shows what Janus is capable of if he utilizes all of his abilities correctly. So in this clip, you're going to see Janus, played by Tyler, in the left lane pushing the tier 1 tower. With no ward coverage, Bakasura is going to jump out of the jungle and attempt to gank him. He throws his threshold down, getting another couple auto attacks on the tower, assuming I'm going to die anyway, might as well take the tower with me. He jukes the Bakasura jump, waits till his portal comes off cooldown, drops it underneath himself, banishing himself and then Bakasura, smacks Bakasura with Unstable Vortex, throws another threshold down, charges his ultimate, turns around, one auto attack, kills the Bakasura. Now, Tyler uses every ability in Janus's kit, and 3 of which he uses twice in this very, very short fight. He's using his threshold to gain speed boosts and slow Baka as well as zone Bakasura. After he portals himself and thresholds himself, he's using his Unstable Vortex to do damage to the Bakasura with a bonus damage from his passive. He's also using the portal to not only save himself, but then banish Bakasura afterwards, guaranteeing an Unstable Vortex hit by hitting him as he's landing, and then charges up his ultimate after gaining a 25% scaling boost from threshold to get the kill. Very, very textbook Janus play. If that clip does not show you the versatility of Janus, I don't know what will. Now, we talked about every single ability that Janus has in that one clip, but let's start talking about some actual tips. First off, let's start with Portal. Now, you saw Bakasura fall through that portal and then get hit by an Unstable Vortex. Falling through a portal will almost guarantee that a good Janus can hit you with Unstable Vortex or through space and time by timing it properly. They can time those abilities to where they come in contact with you as you are landing and you can't do anything about it. Now, he pretty much has to telegraph a portal, essentially laying it on the ground, hopefully in the direction you're heading. So if you see a portal on the ground, obviously just don't walk into it. Also, it's very common for a Janus to try to land a portal behind you so that you're backing into it as you're attacking minions. So be careful backing into a portal that he's placed preemptively to try to trap you. Now, that gets even worse when he throws Threshold down to slow you and then throws a portal in front of you. There's not much juking you can do at that point. So if he hits you with Threshold, he's almost always going to guarantee himself a portal, which he's then going to be able to turn into more damage through Unstable Vortex or through space and time. Now, one tip I can give you is that Janus is very weak against cripples. His main escape mechanic is completely removed from the game as long as he's crippled. So a god like Poseidon, or a god like Ares, or a god like Cupid that have very good cripples can really shut down a Janus. Now let's talk about Unstable Vortex. This ability is fired in a very weird pattern in comparison to the other abilities in Smite. So first off, this can be very hard to get used to. Dodging to the left and the right doesn't work anymore because it waves out. Now, the good news about Unstable Vortex being in a crazy pattern is that once you get used to it, it can be very easy to dodge. You can kind of step up into the gaps of the wave and kind of dance around it. But as a main tip for Unstable Vortex, if you feel like you're going to get hit by the ability, do your best to at least try to get hit by only one of the portals. If you get hit by both of them, you're going to take an extra 30% damage, which is unnecessary because all you got to do is strafe a little bit to the right or left to avoid that damage. Other than that, Unstable Vortex is a very straightforward ability. It just does damage and shoots in a weird pattern. So let's talk about his third ability, Threshold. Now, you've already seen with that first clip that Threshold has a ton of utility. Threshold plus his portal make for a very interesting combination of escape mechanics. So just remember that it speeds him up and his teammates and slows you and your teammates down, as well as making you take more damage from his next ability. Now, as a tip for those who are playing Janus, don't forget to utilize his passive through Threshold. As long as you're not saving it for an initiation or you're pretty sure you're safe, drop your Threshold on the ground, walk over it, and get that extra 25% scaling on your ability. This is going to help you clear faster and and do a little bit more poke damage to the enemy, hopefully gaining you the advantage in lane. Now, I'm not saying to necessarily use this on cooldown. If you think you're going to need it for defensive purposes or to help your opponents get away or zone somebody from initiating a fight, then obviously that 25% of scaling is probably not worth using that ability. Again, just use some forethought when thinking about your passive. And last but not least, his ultimate, Through Space and Time. Let's talk about some of the amazing things that this ability allows Janus to do. First off, remember that any amount of his teammates can go through every portal at least one time. Now this allows Janus and his team to travel in a straight line instead of having to navigate the jungle. This also allows him the ability to rotate in behind a team fight very sneakily. This allows for a very sneaky backdoor push on the Titan to maybe try to down the Titan and end the game. This may allow Janus' team to rotate very quickly on objectives like Gold Fury and Fire Giant. If Janus is at the base and sees a team fight going poorly for his team, he can shoot the portals in that general direction, allowing them to all escape from that fight, and there's an infinite amount of other possibilities. This, in my mind, is one of the coolest abilities in the game. In addition to that, this ability can provide some very amazing misdirection. If we take a look at Tyler's clip again, you'll notice that at the end, as he's ulting Bakasura, he also ults the wall, throwing a portal there. If that would have happened to been in the jungle, he would have gotten a kill and thrown a bunch of portals through the jungle, allowing a very quick escape, so when people rotate over to try to find him or figure out where he was after he got that kill, he is long gone. Now I know this is pretty quick fire, but one more tip for Janus: if he throws a portal on a wall or you see the opposite side of a portal on a wall, you can be prepared for him to pop through that portal. So understand that unlike a jump where somebody can jump over a wall, Janus can portal through it, but he telegraphs completely exactly where he's going. If he goes through that portal, once he gets there, his portal is then on cooldown. So as long as he can't bait you around for his portal to come off cooldown again, you can probably do some decent damage to him. And that's going to do it for this episode, guys. Hopefully you learned a little bit about Janus. He can be a very tricky god to play and can be a tricky god to play against. So thanks for stopping by and hanging out with me, guys, and make sure you come back next week when we're going to be talking about Cabrakan, the destroyer of mountains.